Welcome to Artistic Adventures. Today's video is all about doll skirt design. Today we're going to be talking about making skirts and different ways to make them look either full or short or long or however we want to make them. And I wanted to share this with you because it helps when you're designing a costume and looking at material to know how you're going to structure what you're going to cut out of it. So I've used this first pattern I'm going to show you in a lot of my doll videos. You're probably familiar with it. The first thing I do is take my doll and measure from the waist to wherever I want the skirt to come. Now, let's say we want it to come from there to her feet. I'm going to add about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch because she's going to need a hem. And just to make sure that I have enough and it doesn't come out too short, you can always cut it off, but you can't add more once you cut it. So this comes out to, she's, right about 6.5 inches to her toes, 6 inches to her ankles. So I'm going to make it about 7 total inches, let's say. That gives me enough extra to hem the skirt if I want to, and to trim off some if I think it's too long. All right, now this would be the length for one side, and if you're looking at a circular skirt, well, let me draw it for you. This will be easier. So let's say you have your circular skirt, and if it's for a Monster High doll, and you want the waist to be small, not gathered, then you're going to just cut a small tiny hole at the top for the waist because they have very small waist, and then you're going to account for a seam around that. Okay, and that is where actually the skirt will attach to the bodice. So actually you want to think about your measurement from there to the part that you have to hem up. And that's the total length of your skirt. Now, these Monster High dolls, as I said, have very tiny waists. So here's how I typically do this. If I take my skirt material, and this is not 7 inches, but I wanted to be able to show it to you on the camera and not have so much material. So I take my square, and then I fold it over like this. Okay, and this side should be the side that is the measurement. So from here to here is this measurement. This would be the waist up here, and this is the hem down here. Okay, so if I've got that part right, then when I flip this over again, I'm able to see easily where I should cut it. And you can measure to over here. This part is not accurate, so when you cut it, you're going to cut not straight across, but kind of at an angle, kind of a circular motion like that, so that the length from here to here and from here to here is the same. Then when you open this up, you should have your circle. All right. I'm going to take this again, get the center part, and cut a very tiny piece out for the waist. Now you might think that is way too small. You can see the center part there. But like I said, these dolls' waists are very small, and when you think about adding maybe 1/4 of an inch seam around that, that's going to actually be the size that you need. So don't overcut this. You can always cut it more later, but a really small hole is all you need. And then typically what I end up doing is putting fray check around this area so that it doesn't fray. And then I'll also, let's see if I can make this in an area where you can see it. I'm going to put the fray check about 1 inch to 1.5 inches down from the waist, and that way I can cut that after it dries, and that's going to allow me to get this skirt over the waist of the doll, or over the hips of the doll. So you're going to have basically a cutout like that. So that's very small. Now when you sew your bodice to it, you know, you have this opening at the back that will sew to the edge of the back of the bodice. That way you'll be able to get it on and off the doll. So although this looks small, once you put the seam in there, this increases all these openings quite a bit. So don't get it too big. Now when you have a skirt like this, the way it looks on a doll is it's going to be very fitted up at the waist, but then you're going to have this wide hem. So you have to think about the look that you want. If you want some gathers at the waist, then you have to cut this opening bigger. So you would look at more something like this. Still put your opening, because you're still going to have the back. This will end up being gathered to the size of the waist, but you'll have a more gathered look, but still have the wide hem that you want. Alright, and you can make that even wider if you need more gathers. But the thing you have to keep in mind with, especially these smaller dolls that have tiny waists, at some point there's only so much material that you can gather on a thread until it just gets to the point where you can't gather anymore. And the other part of that is when you have a huge bunch of gathers and you sew it to a bodice, then you have this thick lump that's at the waist of the doll. So you have to consider how that will look. You don't want to have this lumpy looking waist on a very sleek, elegant gown. Okay, so that's my circular method, and one that I tend to use a lot, even when I'm gathering versus just having the nice straight line. Now you might say, why can't I just cut out a rectangular piece like this? And this is something that you may do with adult clothes or child's clothes, because you have a bigger waist circumference to deal with and you can put more gathers. So you say, I just cut out a rectangle, run a gathering stitch, and then gather that together, and that's my skirt. So here's a piece that I did that with, and it's only, you know, that big. And then when you gather it to put it on the doll, as you can see, it doesn't really have a very wide waist. So if that's all you want, then that's fine. If you want a very wide bottom, like for a wedding gown or a fancy evening gown with flowing layers, then you might want to try the circular method. The other thing you have to think about is all the gathers up here that you have to sew to the bodice, and whether that's going to look clunky underneath. Okay, so that's another method. Now, if you wanted to have a waist that was fairly fitted and just a slight flare, then you're going to do more of an A-line pattern, and that's basically a skirt that's going to look somewhat like this. Okay, so you got a more fitted waist, and then just a slight flaring of the skirt, not very wide. And for that, you're going to need probably to do 4 pieces. And once again, you have to keep in mind that this part at the waist is going to be so much smaller once you sew seams. So you're going to have a seam on this side and a seam on that side. Let me draw on the paper where that will be. So there and there. So you see that only leaves, you know, ½ inch. That's going to be actual the part that goes around the doll. So when you sew these 4 pieces together, then you're going to have a waist that's fairly fitted, but you're going to be able to have a slight flare to the skirt. So that's another possibility. And when you do this, you just want to take the back seam and only sew it up this far. So you're going to sew there to there, and then leave this open. So when you join it to the bodice, that's the back, and you'll be able to get your clothes on your doll. And then once you do that, you just flip it over and you can hem this center seam so that the raw edges don't show. And then you put your Velcro or your snaps or whatever you want on it. Another interesting thing you can do in a skirt design is to add what's called a godet. And a godet is basically just a triangular piece like this, and it doesn't go all the way to the waist. It only comes up a little ways depending on how far you want it to extend into the skirt. And this adds flare at the bottom, and sometimes people will use this for contrast, so they might make the main part of the skirt one color, make this another color. The other thing that can be pretty is to use a stiffer fabric with a flowing fabric, and for that you would cut the bottom of this in a rounded motion so that when it's gathered into the skirt, it's got a really pretty soft flowing motion. And then you would only sew from here to here, and that would leave this hanging lower. And that would be kind of an interesting sort of evening gown look, where this would be a soft, like a chiffon, and this would be more of a satin, and then you'd have this elegant little gathered piece flowing out. And you could make it longer or shorter, however you wanted to do it. However wide you make the godet is however much gather you want to have in the godet. So you have to think about that. So you'd be sewing with the godet this part to this part, and then you continue the seam of the skirt up the side of the two pieces. And you can see where that adds quite a bit to the bottom of the skirt. So that's an interesting technique that you can also use. And there's really lots of things. If you just want to do let's say you just want to do, say, a short mini skirt that's really simple, then you just take your Monster High doll, or this is what I do anyway, and lay her down on the pattern material like this paper, and then I just mark around her, knowing that I'm allowing for the roundness of her body and for a seam. So you wouldn't mark it right up beside of her. You're going to give yourself some room to have a seam down the side like that, and then also account for the curve of her body where she's going to need some room in the skirt. Okay, so it's not just a flat envelope type thing. All right, so that would be, let's say that would be the front of the skirt like that. And then for the back, what I usually do is cut this out first and then lay it back down on the paper and then extend the width so it's more like this. And then I cut those two pieces apart, and that will allow for you to have a back seam so that you would leave it open from here up, and that's the part that you need open to be able to get over the doll's hips, and then you just turn those sides under. And then you would also have your seams on the side that you would sew to the front part. So that's how I think about skirts. Now this could be longer. If you just want a really straight long skirt, you could do this any length that you want. This is just a very simple way, and there's really no need for gathers usually at the waist. And you could either put elastic, or you could take a piece of material cut like this and sew it to the waist, and then have a waistband, and then you could put Velcro on the back of that on each side to hold it together. Okay, that's my skirt tutorial for today. I hope that helped you. I'd like to see you guys being creative and making some things yourself, and post those pictures on our Facebook share page so we can all see them and encourage each other. And if you have any questions about this, just ask me in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned to Artistic Adventures for more exciting videos on dolls and dolls accessories, all things doll. We've got lots of things coming up in the future, and I hope you will subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks, and bye.